Hi, everybody. We're going to give another minute or so, wait for some more people to come online. Okay, let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar session today. My name is Shelly James. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing with Exciting. Today, we're going to talk about automating your SAP audit, something I've been through many times over my years in the SAP security field. So it's a little near and dear to my heart. Our presenter today is Alessandro Banzer, our SAP security and GRC expert here at Exciting. A couple of things to mention before we get started. This is one of several new webinars that we are scheduling for this year. We have 3 new sessions that are scheduled that Alessandro will show at the end of the presentation with a link to our webpage where you can see the updates as they occur. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, you can use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar control panel. Just type in your questions, we will keep an eye on them, and then at the end of Alessandro's presentation, we'll try to answer those questions. This webinar will be recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording from GoToWebinar. Later, you'll receive an email from our marketing team to follow up and make sure you got all your questions answered. If you have any additional ones, please send them back to the marketing email or to me at sjames@exciting.com. and we can help answer them offline. Now that we have those covered, let's get Alessandro started and go through our session today. Alessandro.
Perfect. Thank you, Shelly. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alessandro Banzer. Let's talk about SAP Audit today. So we had a couple of webinars already where we tackled a few things when it comes to security monitoring and how we can check our system. So let's, I just wanted to give another deep dive into how we can automate SAP audit or security monitoring, everything that kind of goes hand in hand with automation tools that we have here at Exciting. From the agenda today, as always, very briefly, just who we are for those of you that don't know us just yet. We'll then talk about the challenges that we have with SAP audit. I think most of you, I think that's why you're here. You're dealing with SAP audit often, a couple times a year. And it's always very challenging. I mean, auditors, they're basically tasked to find something. So every time they come back, they have to find something new. And it's always, very challenging for customers to provide all that documentation and keep up with, I would say the urgent demands of the auditor. So let's just look into what are the challenges and how we can solve that. But then talk about tools that we have from Exciting that we can use to automate the SAP audit to basically document and make that entire process smoother and in a more automated fashion. We talked briefly about that in a previous webinar where we talked more about the security monitoring and the integration with CM for into an event management system. We'll briefly tackle that today. We don't go into depth on that side. I just want to mention it. But at the end of the day, it all goes hand in hand, and it's basically like a process we're going through. I also want to show you a live demo in the system, so not just a PowerPoint, really going through systems, so you kind of get a little bit a feeling how the tool looks like, and what we can see and what we can do within the tool. Obviously, the tools are very powerful, they're very large. We won't get through everything. Really just a brief demo, so you get a little bit of an understanding and a feeling of what is possible and how simple it can really be. All right, so let's get started. Just very briefly, who are we? What do we do? We've been around since 2008. We were originally founded in Switzerland. You can tell from my accent, from that part of the world. Currently, I'm based in Tampa, Florida, like Shelly is. So I'm basically in charge of the US operations that we founded in 2016. So we're a global company. We have over 100 employees with offices throughout Europe, and obviously also here in the United States. We're expanding into different markets as well. So we're a growing company, and security is in demand all over the world. What do? We provide services and tools in the area of SAP security. So we basically are an SAP Gold partner. We have certifications for our tools. So all our tools, they are SAP certified. They're also recommended by SAP in SAP notes, and then obviously through the certification status that we have for the S/4HANA Cloud. We also have different recognized expertise statuses in different areas, for example, in GRC, governance, risk, compliance, also data security, and some others. As I mentioned, we are over 100 employees strong. We have a very close relationship with SAP. Not only are we a gold partner, we're also an educational partner of SAP. So we help them getting content together for trainings, but then also we're teaching training classes. We have training classes that we teach from SAP, like all the ADM classes, ADM 940, 945, GRC classes, Single Sign-On, Solution Manager, IDM, everything when it comes to SAP security. That's what we do. That's what we do best, and that's why we are also there in the educational space. That's just briefly about exciting. So today we're going to talk about SAP Audit. How can we automate SAP Audit? Just like a little bit a deeper dive into the topic. So let's just first talk about the challenges that we often see, and that you probably have also seen in the past, and you're always facing when it comes to SAP audits. First and foremost, when it comes to auditing, along with auditing, any type of audits, not just SAP audits, but it's IT audits, finance audits, it always comes down to documentation. So we have to have security concepts. We have to have our concepts documented, and those concepts and documentations, they need to be created. If you're starting with SAP and you haven't done audits before, that's probably the hardest part, is getting a concept together and getting the processes, the configuration, everything documented. It's very complex. Why is it complex? It's because we have a huge landscape. We have interconnectivity between systems. We have a very or an ever-growing landscape, not just on-premise applications. We nowadays have to also talk about the underlying systems, from operating systems to databases, whether, for example, SAP HANA is used, but then also cloud solutions. So we're extending functionality into the cloud. So we also have to make sure that we have our cloud under control. So audits, they get more complex, they get broader, and all that needs to be documented and needs to be validated. And we always have to keep up to date with the ever, changing landscape or products of SAP. Once we have a concept in place and we have it documented, one of the biggest challenges is also to keep it up to date. So as soon as I write something onto a piece of paper or into a Word document or wherever you document concepts, the problem is sooner or later they will be outdated. Outdated because requirements change, laws, regulations change, but then also our system and our system landscape is always evolving. We're upgrading to new releases, we're adding on functionality, we're bringing in new applications like cloud applications. So it's ever changing. From a compliance and regulatory standards, as I mentioned, there's always new stuff that comes up that we have to be up to date. For many of you that are based in Europe, I see quite a few are joining from Europe. With GDPR, for example, the channel data protection regulation to protect personal related information. That's something that just came up a few years ago, and it's very important, and we have to follow, we have to comply with GDPR as soon as we're processing personal related data. And that's just something that just popped out. It's not just happening in Europe. We see it also here in the United States. California has a privacy act. Different states are talking about privacy acts. Different countries are talking about it. And there's always something changing. And all that needs to be documented. We have to comply with it. And we also have to prove to an auditor when we are being audited that we're complying with those regulations. So it's not just that we're putting something on the piece of paper and say we do that. We also have to prove that we have certain things under control. Checking and validating and making sure that we're staying compliant is very time consuming, especially also because we have a huge landscape. We have a lot of different systems, different clients, different on-premise applications, cloud applications. There's a lot of different applications that we have to keep under control, and so it's very time consuming to check that manually. Also, what we want to make sure is when we have an external audit, we want to make sure we don't fail that audit. So if there's something that deteriorates from our project, where we get out of line and something gets out of control, we want to be proactively informed about that so we can correct it before audit comes in and finds that. So that's also one of the things that's very important. When it comes to documenting and proving compliance, very often we have to integrate that with internal control systems. Some of you might use tools like process control for that, but ultimately, it's also important that we integrate the audit information and the concepts and everything into control systems. So a lot of challenges that are just naturally there, that will always be there. It's very hard to avoid them unless we have tools that help us get through those audits. So let's talk about that. The tools that we want to talk about today is part of the Exciting Authorizations Management Suite, so in short, XMS. The XMS, we talked about that in the past in plenty of webinars. The XMS is basically a suite of tools that has different modules. It's 7 modules to be specific, that do different things, from code scanning, from role design, role maintenance, role testing, vulnerability scanning, all the way down to security monitoring and audit, what we do as part of the solution that we call the Security Architect. So the Security Architect is basically our solution when it comes to documenting the security concepts, and then we can integrate with different modules to do different types of checks into different areas, which I will show here in a little bit when we go into the system and take a look. So everything I'm going to show you is part of the XMS, which is an add-on to SAP. It's basically an ABAP add-on, again, fully certified by SAP. And if you have any question to the tool, always feel free to reach out to us. So let's look into what we do. The XMS, and as part of the Security Architect, so everything I'm going to talk now is part of the Security Architect, which is just one of 7 modules that we have. And in the Security Architect, what are the core functionalities? It's basically that we can automatically create security concepts at the push of a button. What does that mean? It means that we have pre-delivered best practice templates that you as a customer can use and then customize to your needs. So we basically have different security concepts available for an ABAP system, for a GRC system, for HR systems, and so on. For different type of systems, we have best practice security concepts available that you can reuse. If you have your own concepts already in place that you want to reuse, they can also be loaded into our Security Architect. So the Security Architect comes with a framework that allows us to manage actual document templates. And you can upload them from a Word document, for example, and make them reusable within the Security Architect. So the first step that we always do, and we'll see it later as well, the first step in the Security Architect is to define a security concept. That security concept defines anything when it comes to security, from interface security, how we manage our roles, how we manage our users, how we manage security settings, and so on. So it's basically a concept that documents how security should be handled within the system. Again, our best practice is a good start, but where obviously most customers, they customize to their own needs. So that's always the first thing that needs to happen. That concept that we put in place can be or is integrated with what we call check modes. So it allows us to validate the concept against any local system or a remote system. What does that mean? That means in the security concept, we define our guidelines. We say, for example, no one should have SAP all in production. All the roles should start with Z or Y, and we give a naming convention. Could be something like password policy, where we say the minimum password length must be 8 characters. All those types of guidelines we put into the concept. Again, we have mass templates that can be reused, and you can just adjust parameters the way it fits for you. But not only is it written into a concept, it also comes with check modes. So if we define in the concept that the minimum password length must be 8 characters, I can then go ahead and check my entire system landscape to see if every system that I have in scope follows that parameter. So the minimum password length must be 8 or greater than 8, and I can validate the entire landscape. Obviously, that's just one of many examples that we have, of many checks that we have available, and that's also part of the core functionality of the security architect. All those checks we can run ad hoc, which I will show in the demo. We can also run them recurring, once a week, once a month, or on a daily basis, to see, what's going on in my landscape. That's important. All those checks are also saved, so we can always compare. We can archive them to see, where was I a year ago? Where am I at right now? To see if I got better, if I got worse in certain areas, to see where we have to work on. The goal here really is to have a security concept in the system that's a dynamic concept, so it lives as we go. That also means that certain parts of the concept are dynamic. That means the content comes from the system. So if I have certain information within the concept that I have to otherwise manually transfer from the system into the concept, like if I would use a Word document, that can be retrieved automatically from the system. So let's say we can, for example, pull a table into the concept, or any other type of information that we can retrieve from the system. We can make dynamic content within the concept. So whenever I print the concept, let's say we have an audit, and I go ahead and print the concept and want to hand over to our auditor, that they go through, they check it, the concept is always up to date. And I'll show what that means here in just a minute. And that's actually the core functionality of the security architect. It's documentation of the concept with dynamic content, and then the ability at any given time to validate that concept against my entire landscape. Obviously, the entire concept, we have, like I said, we have a customizable dynamic framework that also allows to style it the way you want to have it, and you can put your logos on it and your color. All that is also possible, and it's also an open framework. So for those check modes that we will see later, we have like 250 or so that we pre-deliver for different types of checks that we can run. But we also have an open framework. So if you have, first of all, we can extend checks. So there's means within the framework. So we can just with drag and drop and defining certain things, we can add custom checks. But we also have user exits, where if you have an ABAPer that develops, you can also extend your own custom check that are truly custom to you through user exits. It's an open, customizable framework that can be used beyond what we just deliver in standard. So let's take a look. So how does it basically work? It's very simple. We have the security architect, and in the security architect, we define our concept. Obviously, we have in most cases more than one concept. We have a concept for, let's say, our ABAP based system. So we have an ABAP guideline, but then maybe we have a GRC, sub access control system. We have a different concept for that. The ABAP foundation is similar when it comes to standard users, password security, all that stuff is similar. But then we also have dynamic parts for GRC, for example, for sub access control, or for sub HR, for Java-based systems. So we have different concepts available. That's why here it kind of shows more than one. As part of the security architect, we have those check modes, and that allows us to validate the concept against the system configuration. So if we, again, in the concept define minimum password length must be 8, security architect goes out to our systems and checks if that configuration is set up the correct way, and then reports it back into security architect, and we have means to analyze that to see what's going on. In addition, and that's what we had the webinar a couple of weeks ago, we can also then report findings, for example, into a CM system. So we have an open interface to CM. So if you have a like any type of CM like ArcSight or Splunk or Microsoft Sentinel, you can also send those events or those alerts into a CM system if you want to report on them. But that's the principle how the security architect works in detail. Obviously, what we do at the end of the day, again, very simple. In the concept, we define the guidelines, we define the baseline, we say what should be and how it should be in place. That goes into security concept. We can validate against the system configuration, and obviously we can then also report on that. So we can define, or we can output PDF documents, HTML reports, Word documents to provide that document. Again, when you have an audit or you do an internal audit, we can provide that at any given time. You can do adjustments, and we can also check on that. We can even provide insight into the configuration within the concept. So if we define that, and I stick with the example with the minimum password length. If that's defined in a concept, we can even report directly within the concept whether our configuration is correct or not. And I'll show you that here just in a minute. So that's in a nutshell what we do. So when we implement the security architect, it's kind of like 3 steps that we go through, but you don't have to go all the way. So basically, the first one is always we have to define that concept. Again, we deliver best practice templates that you can use. You can upload your own concepts if you have, or just parts thereof, or then customize. That's what needs to happen first. So we have to basically define the baseline, and then we can go ahead and validate the concept. So once we have that established, we can go ahead. We can use our predefined checks, and we have more than 250 available that cover, I would say, pretty much everything that an auditor would check as well, because ultimately what we have done over the years is just followed SAP audits from all the auditing firms. We basically followed what they checked, and we put it into code so that we don't have to do it manually. We can just press a button and those checks run. That's ultimately what we have done. Obviously, we have a framework around that, but that's at the end of the day what it is. Again, those checks can be extended, customized. You can add your own checks. All that is fully available within our framework. And then we can again go out and validate and check the entire landscape, one system or many. We'll see that here in a minute to see how are we following our concept. If you want to go a step further, so once we have that in place, we can also basically achieve even further security monitoring, where we can go into all the way down to a CM integration to report any type of findings into a CM system. As I mentioned, you don't have to do, if you implement that, obviously we wouldn't go all the way right away. We would start here, and I would say the first 2 levels, and that might come later. Most of our customers, they are here, they're not here yet because it's something a little bit newer as well. But a lot of customers are moving that direction as well, because security monitoring, cybersecurity, and monitoring thereof becomes more important nowadays with all the threat that's going on in the world anyways. Okay, so let's take a look. So let's go into the system, and I'll show. And Shelley, if you maybe keep an eye on questions, that'd be great, because maybe let me just pull it up in case I see something coming in. We'll answer it. Perfect. Okay, so I'm here in the SAP GUI, in the Security Architect in the initial screen. What I'm going to show you is basically just in the SAP GUI, the tool itself. We also have reporting capabilities or dashboards in form of Fiori applications. So here it's more the actual concept and how it's been defined, and we can analyze. If we run that and we want to report that, or a manager requires insight, or just want to get the overview, then we also have the Fiori dashboards that show, the health status of our landscape. And I want to go into that. I'm more on the, let's call it the technical side, to kind of see how it actually works and what we can do here. So first and foremost, we can have different documents, and here I just quickly click on create. We'll use one I already have, but just so that you see. I hope my system is not too slow. Maybe I'm in a timeout. Give me just 1 second. Oh, here we go. So you see, we can create different type of concept. We have like a main SAP Security Concept for ABAP. So any ABAP based system can follow that concept. We then have different types available that we can use. In the system I'm right now, I'm basically in my X53 system, which is my GRC box. So this is actually a SAP access control system. So what I can install here are certain concepts, like for example, a GRC concept. I couldn't do a HANA because I'm not running on HANA, for example. But depending on the system type and where I do, and if I do remote, it's different. But we have different documents available for HANA, for HCM, Java, Solution Manager, GRC, and then also for ABAP security guidelines, basically a developer guideline for ABAP developers. So we also have concepts, how custom code should be written, all the guidelines you put in place for your developers. We can also check on that all the way down to code scanning to make sure that code is written the correct way. So here, obviously, just so you can see, different concepts available. I will also give an outlook into the future. So we're connecting different type of systems, especially cloud is a big topic with SuccessFactors, Ariba, Analytics Cloud, S/4HANA, public cloud as well. That will come later this year or beginning of next year. It's on the roadmap. We're moving that direction. Right now, it's really on the on-premise side that we have available. Going forward, we'll also have the cloud world available in the same means we have it here. So this was just how to create. I have one already, so I just pull the one I have, and then we start a Security Architect. And what we then can see here is basically how a Security Architect looks like. Might be a little bit small on my screen here because I'm just using my laptop screen for the webinar, so it's a little bit bigger, and I have to move maybe some columns so you guys can see everything, but I'm pretty sure it will work out. So what I loaded is now my SAP Security Concept for ABAP. So it's basically ABAP base guideline, I would say, for base concept that we have available. And what we can see here, we have different sections to maintain information into that concept. We have templates available, as I mentioned, templates that Exciting provides, or your own ones. We then have the document the way it's defined. We can define our system landscape. If you want to do remote checks, I can define what do I want to check. So I mentioned there's 250 or more than 250 different checks available. Here I can say which ones do I want to check. Here for the demo, I only selected a few. I don't want to run all of them because it takes a little bit longer than just a couple of minutes to run hundreds of checks against a couple of systems. And then also we have the check history, so we can always go back into what was last week, what was last year, to see where we are, and we can also compare different versions with each another. So let's take a look. So what is available here? So we have available templates that I have. So here we have two templates. One is the first one is the one that we deliver. So this is our pre-delivered one. And then I can also have my own chapters that I've uploaded here For example, here I was doing something for CMMC, for the cybersecurity maturity model certification. For those of you that wonder what CMMC stands for, where we have different concepts, for example, for CMMC available as well. So if you're a defense contractor here in the US and you have to comply with CMMC, we also have concepts for CMMC available. Basically here, these are templates that we have available. So they are, at the end of the day, it's like what we see here is a table of content. So we have different chapters, that talk about different things from like, foundation, the processes, user administration, if you use CUA, stuff about authorizations, connectivity, RFC interfaces, SAP security in general, and then also even if you have HANA, authorizations on HANA, all that is here documented. What do we see in here? So if we, let's just say we open like one up, like let's say we go into the authorizations, we look into maybe role documentation, like we can see here, we have a chapter for role documentation. I can double click on that. And then here on the right hand side, let me just make it a little bit smaller. We can basically see a concept that, looks a lot like a Word document would look like. So we have information here that's defined. We have tables, we have pictures, different content is in here. What we immediately see down here, we have variables. So certain variables can be used and reused. So for example, wherever it says customer, we basically have a variable. So wherever it says here exciting LLC, that's just the name of my customer. So instead of writing exciting 100 times in my concept, we use a variable. So we maintain it once, and wherever we have that variable, the text will be replaced with exciting LLC. This is just for like text variables. That's the dynamic content. But then we can also have, for example, database tables or classes that pull in information into that concept. So ultimately, it's not just as, let's call it as stupid as a Word document where we just write something and it's kind of black on white. Here we have that dynamic content. So it's a document that basically lives, when I make any type of changes. And we can see that here. So for example, here with the role names, here we say the names of roles must respect the following naming convention. So here I basically have defined my naming convention, and all I defined was that the first character must be a Z. So not a very sophisticated naming convention, but obviously you would have a much more rules how your role names must look like. Obviously here it's not just written in text. So if I go here into that role names, and we can also just click here, and let me just maybe go into the edit mode here. When we go in here, you can see this is basically the chapter, and to edit the document, it's kind of like a what you see is what you get editor. So we can here just go in and delete. We can add, so we can add certain things if we want to, with different what we want to add, like a table, bullet points, or we can also just go into the text-based mode, basically like a HTML type editor with very simple HTML, and it has to compile. Haven't started that yet, and then we can basically see how that section of that chapter looks like. So here we have the text, as I was just saying, and then you can see here, instead of having that table, I basically use a variable, which is a dynamic. There's a rules, a framework behind. So this is basically a variable name, and within the customizing, I define, in this example, I'm pulling from a database table, and I can do filters and what columns I want to show, and that then is being shown when I run the concept. So we can see that here. We can also see here we included certain what we call check IDs, or from our check modes. So we define the naming convention for our roles. We say all the roles must start with Z. Simple example here. And then we also have a check to that, so that we can check for all our roles if they follow the naming convention. And so obviously that check is also referenced here within the concept. If I generate it, let me just quickly say yes. We don't see the check just yet because we didn't run a check. We just generated the concept where we say, okay, this is my my documentation. This is how I say that my roles should be named. We'll run the check mode here in just a minute. So that's basically how we define the templates. We have that what you see is what you get editor, so you can edit more on like a graphical manner, or then the text-based. Obviously, we can also upload, so we have abilities to upload. So we can upload your own chapters. So again, from a Word document, if you have a Word document with headings and all that stuff, we can upload, and it will basically upload it the same way it's uploaded here. Different chapters, you can see here, not all of them might apply to me. For example, let's say I don't have a CUA, then all I do, I deselect that, and then CUA is not part of my concept anymore, because here I have the templates, I can change them, and if I select something, it will pop up in my document. So here I can see how my document looks like. So my document right now has 13 different chapters. And you see there's no CUA. If I would add it back, then the CUA would show up here again. So basically up here, I define those pieces of the concept, whether pre-delivered or my own ones, or I can also change our pre-delivered ones. And then I can also say whether I want to include it in the concept or not. So here, basically I make those selections, and then down here, I can see where they are. And I can also move them from an ordering perspective, all that. We can drag and drop, move from here to there. We can order them differently. All that is possible. Once we have that concept, I can generate it any given time. So I can, in the simplest form, I just click here on generate concept document. And now what happens, it will basically generate. I think I will get a warning because I have something included that doesn't exist in the system here. Let's just see if you get the warning. It's always better to warn before we see the warning than after it happens. So I know we're getting a warning here. Let's just give it a second.
We have one question. Do you want to take it?
Yeah. So regarding the maintenance of the concept, especially when we use the central mode, where we will probably, I think the question goes towards if we maintain many concepts. So the easiest way to edit would be with an upload. Obviously, if we use a Word document, for example, to just get content into it. But then when it comes to those check modes and stuff, it's not that hard, and very often it doesn't need to be changed once it's in the system. Again, text, and that's also one thing that I often do, especially when I write on, like, for example, the CMMC concept that I was referring before. Let me just see here quickly. The concept that I had here was different, domains of the CMMC. So that concept, I didn't write it in here. So basically, I use the tools to download, so I can export it into Word, and then upload it again into the system. So certain things I change in Word just because it's easier to work on entire concept in Word, make all my corrections, change the text, and then just re-upload. So you also have that ability to use it through Microsoft Word at the end of the day. That usually makes it easier if we do a lot of multiple concepts at the same time. For minor changes, I just go in here, right click, and say edit content. So what do we see here now? Let me just go into full screen. So basically here, we now get the concept here, obviously just in line in the SAP GUI. We could then export that, to HTML, Word, or as a PDF if you print it, different abilities to get that out of the system. Now here we can see we have a style sheet. So we have, even like a header, and then just a title, and I can see what it is. And then basically here, it generates my concept. You can see, and this is not fully maintained, it's not fully customized, it's just certain things, but you can see we have stuff about GDPR, SOX, just general information, what that is, all the way down to then, information about how the system needs to be configured, information directly from the system. So here we can see I run, something about developer keys, so dynamic content from the system. We even have text that changes depending on system configuration. So if you have set up the system one way, then the text will show one way, and if you have the configuration a different way, it will show the other way. So we have different, sometimes even different pictures, depending on like say workflow diagrams and stuff like that, just depending on how the system is configured. But this is ultimately the concept that we then from here can print out, hand over to an auditor, and they will go in and validate that and see if everything that they want to see is defined. Obviously, this is just a concept. So this is the first step where we have that concept put in place. Again, it's in the system. We can print it out to Word. All that information is obviously there. But obviously, the good thing here, it's in the system. So it's within SAP. The second step then, let me just make it a little bit smaller here. The second step is then to run those check modes and connect different checks. And again, we have that pre-delivered, so you don't have to connect 250 checks yourself. We already have that taken care of. That would be more if you customize. We then have to see what checks and maybe also what parameters we want to use, like the password rule. We say by default minimum password length must be 8. If your organization says no, it should be at least 10, then we need to change those parameters in the concept. So in the concept, we define different values so that the check modes, they can check against different values. To check, and let me, before we go into the checks, obviously we can not only check locally, we can also check remote from a central, we call it central mode perspective. Most of our customers, they run the security audit on Solution Manager because we have the RFC connections to all the backend systems from that perspective. So Solution Manager is a great tool for security architect, or even GRC or a COA system. So like a central system that has a lot of RFCs already, it's a good way to set it up as a central hub. Obviously, you can set it up anywhere. It doesn't have to be on Solman, doesn't have to be on GRC or COA. You can also do it in your S4HANA or in your CRM. It doesn't matter. All we need is just the definition of that of the systems that the central mode will be able to scan. You can see here, I'm basically in my X53. We can also see it up here. So my system is X53, which is my GRC. This is my SAP Access Control GRC system, not an ABAP, not a S4HANA. But here I defined other systems that I grouped under S4HANA. So I have my S4T and my S4D, so my test and my development system from S4HANA are connected here. And obviously, it's super simple, so we can just maintain them. Let me just go ahead. We change something. Just quickly save it. Because I changed something, it asked me for new versions. We also have versions, obviously. Didn't talk about that, but if you make changes to the concept, it saves in different versions as well. So we can always see also what changed within the concept. If you change text or whatever, it creates new versions. And here you can basically see I have different systems set up. So we have, for example, or do we have the S4HANA that we just saw the group S4HANA. Have different systems here connected. I say what type of system it is because different checks react differently depending on the system type. So for example, we say SAP all should not be given to dialog users in productive systems. The development system might be okay. So in development, we might just show a warning versus in a productive environment, it would be a critical high risk that we would show. So depending on different system types, we can also change the severity of those checks where, again, in development, something is okay, in production, it's not. And then we can connect those different RFCs or the different systems we have to the different concepts, as you can see here. So the ones I'm just showing, and I'm in the security, in the SAP Security concept, that's why I just see the S4HANA. They're basically here maintained to that concept. If it's a HANA system, it will be connected to the HANA concept and so on. So this is basically the system. So here I can deselect what I want to scan. So we just close this. So we have everything selected, all the systems. And then here we can look into those check scopes or the check modes, as we call them. So here we have, in this example for the ABAP baseline concept, we have different types of checks. We have checks for authorizations, where we can check, for example, for critical authorizations, for critical combinations, SOD conflicts, on user, on role level. We can scan for critical profiles. So for example, here you would say critical profile is SAP all, SAP new, SA system, And so those are critical profiles. We don't want to have them assigned, then we can maintain those. Maintaining can be done from a concept or directly from here, where I can say, okay, these are my critical profiles. I can also say they're okay for certain users. So for example, here, SAP All is okay for WF batch, so I don't want to report on that, stuff like that. We can also here put on a kind of like an exclusion list, kind of like a mitigation framework to say, I'm aware of that, that's okay. Or we have roles that maybe don't follow the naming convention for a reason, we know, we're aware of that, we make basically an exclusion for it. That's what we have to customize in here. You see, for authorizations, we have for role management, like naming convention is the one I have selected, so we can scan for naming conventions later. We have for system security, different things when it comes to RFCs, secure network communication, SSL, you know, if you have a virus scanner enabled, and so there's a lot of different checks that we pre-deliver. Also for system settings, you know, for ECAT or ECAT settings, table logging, for different type of parameters where we have different checks. Here we can, for example, see also custom checks that are added. So these are basically with Z. These are the ones I added here manually within the framework. So I can just add them here. I can actually say right click and then say, no, I have to go up here and say create custom check ID. No, I know Exciting delivers something. For example, we're checking for parameters. I want to check for something else. Then I create my own check ID, check for my own parameters, and then include it back into the concept. That's that flexible, customizable framework that we have to extend those checks as well. So different types of checks, also for user management, standard users. For example, here I'm checking for standard users, and so on. Ultimately, what can I do? So I have here different checks selected. I have different systems selected. In this example, it's basically 4 different systems we're checking. And then what we do here, and this is now in an ad hoc situation where I just go ahead and say here, either check and show in document or check and show as in table. This is an ad hoc version of just running it. We can also run it in background. We can have it recurring. We can send it out via email. So, you know, if you're in charge of security compliance audits, whatever you want to call it, and you want to get a report every Monday morning to see, you know, what happened last week, something happened, something needs to be corrected. You can get those status reports every Monday, for example, or every day, every week, every month, however you want to schedule it. That's also possible. So here I'm just doing it online. That means it's just an ad hoc scan. It takes just a few seconds.
You want to answer the next question?
Yes, let me quickly check. It was a question regarding the access or the data. Where is the data stored and how is the access controlled? So obviously all the information here is stored within the system. So it's in our own table and namespace, basically. In our namespace is /exciting, everything will be stored there. In this example, it's stored locally in the central system. We can also push it back to the backend system. So if you want to have it in a if you don't want to run it here from central mode into all the remote systems, if you want to run it, for example, in S4T directly, we can also synchronize the customizing the information from here back to S4T 100 in this example, and then you can run those checks there as well. So we can also distribute the content and the customizing that is possible. Otherwise, if you do it just in a central mode, which most customers do, everything is in this example in my X53 system, the data is stored here. Access to the documents can be controlled. We have authorization objects that control the access to Security Architect, like to all the other modules. You can authorize users to just display stuff. You can authorize users to change and release versions. It's all controlled by authorizations, basically. So here what I did, I ran a couple of scans, not all of them, just a couple that I know run fast against 4 different systems. Let me go back into full screen, and I'm basically showing this now in a table view. Very simple, but this is very often what the IT people need. We want to see what is incorrect, where do I have to work on. And here, very simple. So we can see the checks that we ran, and then it's just a traffic light. Red, bad, green, good. If it's orange, that would be a warning. So we could, again, that comes down to the severity of the checks. If we say, for example, SAP all in development, we just want to show it as a warning, not as an error, then here it would show up as a warning, yellow or orange, depending on the GUI settings. So here at the moment we just have green or red, good or bad basically, and I can see certain checks ran against S4D. So that's basically everything that's client independent. So for example, like a security audit log, you know, it's active in S4D. It's not active per client. It's active for the entire system. That's a system approval parameter. That's a check for the entire. Otherwise, certain settings are client specific. Like so, for example, naming convention for roles. Roles are client dependent. That's why the check went just against client 100. If you would have multiple clients in S4D or in S4T, like we can see here, we have 2 clients. That's why here we have the check against 2 different clients. Certain settings are for the entire system. Now, what do we see here? We see green or red. Green means good, red means bad. So for example, here, naming conventions for roles. If I see something red, I can double click and I can also see why is it red, why is it bad? Because here we have a couple of roles that don't follow my naming convention. So here, a little bit tricky now to understand, but here, this is basically the naming convention that's defined, where the first 4 characters should be CVR underscore or Z sub underscore or CXIT underscore. They are something else. That's why they're showing up. So naming conventions obviously a little bit tricky to understand if you haven't built them, but we can see that here. Simpler ones, like for example, password settings, you can see here in all the systems I'm failing, so locally as well as somewhere else. Let's just go here, for example, and we can then see there was in the concept we have different parameters. And again, here we're just re-looking at the technical view. This is what I need to make corrections. Here we can, for example, see the minimum password length. In the concept, we say, this is basically the expected column. In the concept, we say it must be greater or equal to 7. At the moment in the system, it's set up as 6. So we're not following our concept. And that's why here it's showing as red. That's why the overall check for password settings shows as red, because we're basically missing or having certain parameters set up the wrong way. So here you can really go in and see the details of what's going on in more a table view. I would say for auditor or for internal control people, it's more interesting to show in a document. So we can also show and run the same check and show in a document. Let me just do that here very quickly. And then we basically get the PDF document again that we can just print out. And this is very interesting. This is very helpful if we do, like, let's say we do a pre-audit or internal audit. We run it and we see, hey, there are certain things in certain systems where they need to be corrected. We can see what's good, what's a warning, what's bad. Some checks, for example, here's one check that didn't run, that's wrongly configured. That's why it hasn't been executed. And then we basically see it within the concept. So we see here, for example, we say developer keys should be handled with care. And we can see in this system, there are 2 developer keys maintained. So 2 users are developers that maybe shouldn't, because X53, and that's why here we see it in here, is basically a productive system. So I classify it as a prod system, and the check is set up the way that developer access, developer keys should not be maintained within a productive system. That's why it's showing up here with 2 existing developer keys. Now in here, if you want to see who it is, now here we see it directly, but we could also drill down here, double click here, and then we can see, okay, these are the 2 users that have access or have that developer key. In others, like the ones we saw before, like here, so this is basically what we're expecting. So we have, like, this is a rule about standard users. So we define here in the policy how we should handle default users, standard users like Substar, DDIC, and so on. And then here we can see I checked against different systems with my standard users. So for example, in my S4T or my X53, I have different type of default users with incorrect settings. Again, if I see that, I can drill down. I can see, okay, here, DDIC exists, password is not trivial, so the password at least has been changed, but the user exists. That's actually against the OSS recommendation. We also here have the OSS information, so we can go there. We can see what the OSS says, how standard users, for example, should be maintained. So we always have that ability as well to basically go of the concept to see, what is actually that we have defined. If I don't understand the table view, to see what is it in the concept, where does it belong to, and why is it flagging up. And then obviously here we have also status to see, of the entire concept, where do we have any findings, any issues that need to be corrected. So that's ultimately what we can do with the security architect, where we can define the concept, define the landscape, and have the different check modes and run them and scan the entire landscape. As I mentioned, we have check history, so we can always see local checks when I execute them, remote checks for different systems. We can then obviously also go back in time and see here even who executed it, and go back and look and see, okay, what was it that they ran at that time? Obviously here we're only doing, we run a couple of checks, not running all the ones we have. And then we can also see, what was the status back then. So this was from 2019, I believe, or whenever it was. I can even see then, okay, what was the issue that we found back then when that check ran. And we can also compare. So we can also have the ability to compare one check with another to see, how did what happened over time. But given the time, I'll leave that, but we can also obviously compare. We have here ability to also compare check results, again, from different checks. And like, let's quickly see here, we have different checks. If we want to compare them, we can also compare them, and then we see the difference, what happened, what came up, what was mitigated or solved over time. That's in a nutshell in the system. So let me quickly go back to the slides, because I have 2 more slides I wanted to show before we get into the questions. So what's very important again is that with the security architect, we basically set up a central system, and then we can connect to any type of ABAP system, Java, as well as SAP HANA directly at the moment. We can report within the security architect with emails, PDF documents, all that stuff can be done directly here. And we can also extend that information into a CM. That's very important. If we define something, simple example, just to keep it simple, SAP all in production. We define SAP all should not be assigned to anyone in production. Now, obviously, in the security architect, we would define it in the concept, and we have check modes to check that. Now, the check modes, they only check when we run them, either ad hoc or when we have them scheduled. So it's always reactive. But at least we would find, okay, Alessandro now has SAP all in production. We would find that if it's still assigned. Now, in case that I assign it to myself and take it off 2 minutes later, and there's no check run at that time, we wouldn't see that, because it's doing an analysis at a given time. With the CM connector, on the other hand, that we have, so we have an add-on to security architect that can be configured, we can achieve real-time monitoring. So if I assign SAP all in production, an alert would be triggered real-time. So within a second, email goes out or an alert goes out to CM that comes through the security architect, because we're doing active monitoring of the system. So if someone assigns SAP all, and if I take it off 2 seconds later, it will still be captured and it will still be reported. That's what the CM connector does. In addition, obviously, all the check modes, or most of the check modes that make sense, can also be reported into CM if there's anything that comes up that shouldn't come up. That's what we can even do if we want to bring that entire auditing piece a level higher, and when we talk about security monitoring, all the way integrating into a CM. As I mentioned, this is just for future references. So at the moment, we're very much ABAP or on-premise driven. We have Java and HANA. As well to look into different checks going forward. That's planned for later this year, beginning of next year. We're also looking into cloud solutions, especially as for HANA, a public cloud, analytics cloud, SuccessFactors, Ariba, and Concur. Those 5 applications are on the roadmap. They're the first ones. And then we will also provide the security concept, the documentation of it, as well as different types of checks as far as they can be done, because obviously there we have SaaS applications, software as a service. You don't have to deal with security as much as we do on the on-premise side. but we'll also have similar capabilities available, especially when it comes to critical access, segregation of duty access. That's what we will also be able to do going forward. So also future-proof. If you are interested in security audit, it will also be future-proof because we're also looking into those type. And then obviously also integrations into SAP standard tools like access control, IAG, already possible. Also with SAP IDM CM, obviously already possible. That will also be extended with the cloud component going forward. Just to basically put it out there. I know we're on time, so just 2 more minutes. Important from an XMS perspective, again, we're an ABAP add-on. We're entirely built in ABAP. We have different license models available, from subscription-based, perpetual-based, for short-term, long-term. Everything's available. We live and sit in our own table namespace, so nothing will be modified. Everything we do is SAP standard. That's also the only reason why we are SAP certified for the cloud. So our tools can be used, install them, use them for a project, uninstall them, and everything, like when you build roles or stuff, everything will be in SAP standard. Obviously, all the features, Security Architect, for example, if you uninstall, you will lose the features, but it's important you don't break anything, you don't modify any SAP standard functionality if using our tool. To wrap it up, again, I think the big benefits of using automation tools like Security Architect for SAP audits, for any type of monitoring, is that we have a full transparency across the entire landscape. At the moment, it's very much on-premise. Going forward, it will also be in the cloud. It allows us to be proactive and yes, sort out issues before they occur or before an auditor finds them. It just makes those auditing or those audits much more convenient. Also, at any given time, you can just press a button, hand the document to the auditor, and even give them the test plan, if you will, and say, hey, we already checked all those items in the concept. We know they're good. Do a couple of spot checks, and I think you're done. Again, we can integrate with CM if that's of interest, and obviously we can also cover customer requirements with our open framework, with those customizations we can do within the framework, but then also the ability to extend with your own code through user exits. Again, as I mentioned, we're ABAP add-on, so no additional hardware is required. You can just leverage what you have. That's another big advantage of using our tools. You don't have to set up another system, just a transport in, super simple to install, rapid deployment. We can have it up and running in a few hours. Obviously, the configure or the customization of the concept takes a little bit longer, but to just show you the checks I showed you today, we have that running in 1 hour. So, and I can even prove you that if you do a proof of concept, which we also offer free of charge. With that, I don't see any more questions, Shelley. So we're at the top of the hour anyways, or even over a little bit. Here, just the next webinars that we have planned, looking more into specific features of the XMS with, especially with Fiori. How can we automate implementing Fiori from creating catalogs, but also modeling the role concept with Fiori. That will be on May 12th. We then have a session about EAM scenarios, so firefighter, basically emergency user, that we do a little bit differently than SAP does it with the firefighters, with better insight, better logging. Talked about that on June 3rd. And then also, if you have a huge organizational structure and you do derived roles, you want to make that easier and more efficient, then we have a great webinar on July 8th that makes handling organizational values and derived roles a breeze. I can promise you that if you've seen that, you definitely want to use that tool. With that, Shelley, anything I forgot?
Nope. Just want to wrap it up by saying that there is a YouTube playlist, and was the link on one of your slides? I don't think it was. But if you go to YouTube and look up the exciting subscription, you can get on our list, and these videos will go out on there also. I mean, you will receive a link from GoToWebinar once this session is finished. And glad everybody was able to come today. It's good. One that I was very interested in. This was what sold me on exciting. So it's always good to hear about helpful things for audit.
Yeah.
So thank you,
Really
everybody.
makes it so much easier, right? When you just can click a button and you have it updated and you have it validated and then possibly also integrated into security monitoring. That really makes it easy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.